All information gathered in this video has come from a range of sources, and all footage, music, images, of information used in this video completely belongs to the copyright owners. All information is correct at the time of publishing. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing.
In 1944, at the age of 15, Marceline Loridan-Ivens was arrested in occupied France, along with her father. They were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. When they arrived, they were forcibly separated. Though he managed to smuggle a last note to her via an electrician, she never spoke to him again. This video is a continuation of Marceline's letter addressed to the father who she would never know as an adult, to the man whose death has enveloped her life. With poignant honesty, she tells him of the events that have continued to haunt her, of the collapse of their family, and of her efforts to find a place in a changing world. This is a breathtaking memoir by an extraordinary woman, and an intimate and deeply moving message from a daughter to her father. Mama didn't come for me in Paris. No one was waiting for me. I'd given the phone number of the Chateau 58 in Ballin. I still remember that, and she finally answered after they'd tried calling her several times with no success. They told her I'd come back and handed me the phone. I immediately asked if you were there. She didn't reply, all she said was, "Come home." I understood by the hesitation in her voice that you hadn't come back, so I told her I didn't want to come home. I don't remember how she reacted. It didn't matter. You were the one I wanted to see. And I would have happily stayed there, at the Lutetia, that luxurious well-established hotel on the Boulevard Raspail that the Germans had made their defense headquarters, and which the liberation had converted into a center for returning deportees. It was like a space between adjoining rooms. We slept 2 or 3 to a room, everyone on the floor, at the foot of the empty beds with their white sheets, unable to bear the feel of a mattress. And all we thought about was eating. Our backs were still there, on the wooden slats of our prison beds, but our stomachs were here. We were torn apart, conflicted. We were miracles. To everyone in the foyer reading the lists, or on the sidewalks waving signs and photos of their families who'd disappeared, I said over and over again, everyone is dead. If they insisted, showing me family photos, I'd calmly say, were there any children? Not a single child will come back. I didn't mince my words, I didn't try to spare their feelings, I was used to death. I'd become as hard-hearted as the deportees who saw us arrive at Birkenau without saying a single comforting word. Surviving makes other people's tears unbearable. You might drown in them. Yet all those people stayed. And every time a new bus arrived full of returning deportees, everyone got excited. At the Lutetia, waiting eagerly still seemed permissible. I had even met the man who was in solitary confinement in the cell next to mine in the Saint-Anne-de-Vignon prison, the first stage of our deportation to the camps. And yet, he'd been condemned to death. I'd never seen his face, we couldn't recognize each other, but in the foyer of the Lutetia, he was looking for me. Everyone was looking for someone, not necessarily a relative, maybe a friend made in a holding camp, or in the hell of a barracks. He was looking for Marceline. I think I told you how I had communicated with him by tapping on the wall of my cell. I used the order of the alphabet, since I didn't know Morse code. A was 1 knock, B was 2, and so on. I'd spelled my first name to him that way. Marceline took 80 knocks. It takes a long time, it forms bonds. They didn't kill me, he said when we found each other, they deported me to Buchenwald. And I would have gladly stayed at the Lutetia, let myself get carried along by his story, by the other stories, fleeing my premonition, your prophecy, trying to believe you were still lost in Russia or some other place. Far from life, the life that was asking me to live again, a life full of silences, missing people, deception. The life where you didn't exist. But the hotel couldn't let me stay. I was given my repatriation papers and put on a train headed south. I didn't want to go if you only knew how much. The only possible reunion was with you. Sharing things and talking about what had happened was only possible with you. I went back home, a bit of flesh on my body again. They never saw me really thin, my hair had nearly grown back. I was standing in a jam-packed train car, one of the lucky ones, some people said, because I still had a family. But I wasn't really there. I was clinging on to you, which meant I was clinging on to nothing. 18 hours later, the train pulled into the station at Ballin. Moma hadn't come to meet me on the platform. Uncle Charles was there. Later on, he'd tell me what had happened to him, how he'd been at Auschwitz and was then sent to Warsaw to clear away what remained of the ghetto, where the revolt had just been crushed, how he'd run away, hidden in a carriage full of rubble, joined the Polish resistance, fought with them, all the while hiding the tattooed number on his arm, convinced that they wouldn't want a Jew with them. Right in the middle of the German defeat, he'd taken a boat from Odessa and disembarked with the others at Marseille, but when they explained where they'd come from, they wanted to lock them up in the madhouse. He'd decided it was better not to say a word. That day, when no one was looking, he showed me his tattoo, saying, "I was at Auschwitz. Don't tell them anything about it, they couldn't understand." Michel was with him. He'd gotten bigger, he was 8. I knelt down in front of him and asked, "Do you recognize me?" He said no, but a few seconds later, he added, "I think you're Marceline." He looked like a child who'd been abandoned. You were the one he was waiting for. We set off in silence. Once we'd crossed the bridge over the River Lez, I saw the Chateau de Gordon outlined against the hillside. It made me want to turn back. I've never understood that place. I remember the first time you took me there, in a horse-drawn carriage, you were so excited and asked, "What is the thing you wish for most in the world, Marceline?" as if you were about to grant my wish. What did I hope for? The end of the war, that we'd be together, no longer apart, no longer hiding, that was what I wished for and nothing else. But you insisted and spoke in a very mysterious voice, "The place where I'm taking you." You would have liked to hear me cry out that I'd always dreamed of a house like that. I didn't say it. I wasn't old enough to ask questions, but I didn't understand why you were so excited. We were at war, we were living apart, in hiding. Pétain had come to power, he made us sing songs at school that I still know by heart, and you had just bought a chateau. Did you think that by becoming the owners of a chateau we would no longer be Jews in their eyes? You did know, though, you read every paper you could. But you wanted to believe in this country where you'd settled, you pretended to forget that the chateau couldn't legally be yours, for the simple reason that you were a foreign Jew and didn't have the right to own property. It was Henri, your eldest son, who'd signed the title deeds. He'd become a French citizen when he turned 18 and had just been demobilized from a war we'd lost. But you had proclaimed, "Here, we are free," as if to justify not having seen things through, to distance yourself as much as possible from the Polish pogroms. You'd planned to go to America, but you'd stopped here, in France, perhaps because of Zola and his Jacques, or Balzac, whom you'd read in Yiddish. You must have told yourself that nothing could happen to us here. How naive you were. Maybe by buying the chateau and the vineyards all around it, you were showing some belief in Marshal Pétain, who advocated a return to the land. Or maybe you believed too much in the so-called free zone. Or the village's mayor and police chief, who'd promised you they'd give us some warning. We were Jewish and we lived in the most visible of all the houses. That chateau was not for you, not for us. And we spent one night too many there. On that night, we'd warned many people not to stay at home. Who knows why we decided not to run away until the next day. One more night in this chateau. One night too many. Did you see how fast they took it away from us? They put everyone they just arrested inside. We didn't know them, perhaps they were resistance fighters or people suspected of helping them. They arrived in groups. You were still groggy from the violent blow to your head from the butt of the rifle, and I was clumsily packing our suitcases when a German said, "Take sweaters, it's cold where you're going." They confiscated our house in front of our very eyes, and as Moma and Henriette watched, hidden in the bushes farther away, it was no longer our home, it never had been. Or for barely 2 years. The Germans set up their headquarters there. We made our way home almost in silence, me, Michelle, and Uncle Charles. Mama was in the courtyard. She took me in her arms. "I can't stay here," I said right away. I added that you wouldn't be coming back. Your prophecy burned in my throat. "Rest for 24 hours and then we'll see," she replied. That made no sense. She was playing for time. She didn't know what to say. She was one of those generous but brusque people, the kind completely lacking in insight, who block out their emotions, transforming them into laughter or anger. You know very well how she used to suddenly get all upset and lash out, how she would shout and pinch us hard. She had always been more caring toward her sons than she ever was toward her daughters, for we were nothing more than an extension of herself. She left it to you to teach us affection and authority. She wasn't hard-hearted. I didn't hold it against her that she hadn't come to the Lutetia or to meet us at the station. She didn't understand where I was coming back from, or didn't want to. She would have had to find words and gestures that were alien to her. They'd been free for a whole year when I arrived. Mama was off and away, she was trying to get back her shop in Epinal, and everything they'd stolen from us, to earn a bit of money. Henri was in Paris about to get married, still thrilled by the months he'd spent with the FFL, the French resistance, carried along on the post-war wave of amnesia and anti-Semitism that made everyone believe in a heroic France that clashed brutally with every one of my memories. Jacqueline was at boarding school in Orange, Michelle was at Henriette's house, I saw them on weekends. They had the imagination of the very young, saying that one day you would suddenly appear out of the blue, that now you were just sick and lost, far away, very far away, unable to tell anyone your name or address. Michelle often wanted to go to the station and look for you on the platform. Strangely enough, sometimes I joined them, embraced their illusions, their fantasies, not for long, just for a few hours, to fall back into childhood again. Sometimes Jacqueline came into my room, she was 13, and asked me questions about what had happened to me. She was the only one who did. I talked to her, but I don't remember what I said, whether I protected her or not. I'd also started writing, but always tore everything up. No one wanted my memories. We didn't have any memories in common, we should have been able to add our memories to theirs, but instead, they pushed us apart. So I wandered through the chateau alone during the week. At night, I had horrible nightmares. I didn't go out during the day, I was afraid to cross the bridge, to run into the locals. I wandered through the house panic-stricken, the house that was too big with its 2 stories and 20 rooms, its tower, the enormous vineyards all around it. Everything came back to me, even Henry's bad jokes about my frizzy hair. You have to catch Marceline and stick her at the end of the broom to brush away the spiderwebs. Because afterwards you told him off and protected me. I wasn't running away from ghosts, quite the contrary, I was chasing after them after you. Who else could I share anything with? I told all of them about your letter, they would have liked to hear what it said, but I couldn't recall a single word, so they finally forgot about it. I was the only one who kept that miraculous feeling I'd had back then, the note I'd held in my hands, my darling little girl. But here, nothing had any meaning, not the chateau, not my return. Henri and I both seemed destined to the same sense of loss, the same curse, destined to dust. I was too young then to instinctively imagine what that chateau could tell me about you. I only understood much later, you'd found an estate equal in stature to the man you dreamed of becoming. You have to grow old to truly understand your parents' thoughts. I know that when you were a young man in Poland, you loved to wear an English top hat and carry a cane, but in secret, because of your strict, austere, very religious father, you'd shaken off the yoke of arranged marriages, married Mama because you loved her. You wanted to be a modern man. Then you'd fallen madly in love with that chateau, with its tower that would be the symbol of your freedom, your success. It was your dream, not mine, the one you were pursuing the day you took me there for the first time. What do you wish for most in the world, Marceline? No one ever asked me that question again. What I would have liked when I came back was to be treated like an orphan. The orphans went to a sanatorium, they were still together, and I often used to think about them. As for my friends, the ones who had died as well as the ones who'd come back, we were a close group, united by suffering. Never had I felt as loved as I had back there. I know now that they were my family, more than my family was. "Say I'm your sister," Françoise had whispered to me in the camp when a messenger from the SS had asked for my number. She undoubtedly had wanted to do something to help me, or at least, that's what Françoise and I thought. When they ask your number, it's probably a good sign. "Say I'm your sister," she'd whispered. We'd been friends since Drancy. When we'd arrived at the camp, she forced me to walk when I wanted to get into the truck that would have taken me straight to the gas chamber, and later, when I was very sick and didn't want to go to the infirmary, she'd traded my bread for some aspirin, even though she could have just eaten it herself. But I didn't say she was my sister. I was alone, I was only responsible for myself, my only family then was you. I've always thought it was my fault if they sent her to the gas chamber. Françoise and her beautiful blue eyes haunted me for a long time, like a reprimand, a sister in misfortune. So I would have been happy to be on a bed in a sanatorium, with the others, talking to them about Françoise and about my selfishness, listening to them tell me that it wasn't my fault, that we were innocent, watching our hair grow back, pouring out memories to women who could bear to hear them and were able to understand. We were coming back to life again, making different choices. The camp hadn't wiped out all of our backgrounds and personalities, but I would have really liked to be in the same place as them, just for a little while, far away from the chateau, from my mother, from the world that looks down so haughtily at the fate of young women. Almost immediately, Mama very quietly asked me if I'd been raped. Was I still a virgin? Good enough to be married off? That was her question. That time, I did resent her. She'd understood nothing. Back there, we were no longer women, no longer men. We were the dirty Jewish race, stuck, stinking animals. We stripped naked only when they were deciding when we'd be put to death. But after the war, the obsession of the Jews to rebuild everything at all costs was intense, extreme. If you only knew. They wanted life to continue normally, as before, they went about it so quickly. They wanted weddings, even though people were missing from their photos because they hadn't come back, weddings, couples, singing, and, soon, children, to fill the void. I was 17, no one even thought about sending me back to school, and I didn't have the strength to ask. I was a young woman, soon they'd marry me off. If you had been there, you wouldn't have been able to bear her questions, you would have told Mama to be quiet. You also would have told her to let me sleep on the floor. She didn't want to understand that I couldn't stand the comfort of a bed anymore. You have to forget, she'd say. Maybe you would have found it difficult to lie in a bed beside her. You would have wanted to sleep on the floor like me, you would have run away from the nightmares that catch up to us and punish us when the sheets are too soft. I even sometimes tell myself that you would have sent me back to school, I missed it so much afterwards. You would have understood me better than anyone and forgiven me everything. I'm dreaming, no doubt. But there would have been two of us who knew. Maybe we wouldn't have talked about it often, but the stench, what we saw, the foul smells and the intensity of our emotions would have washed over us like waves, even in silence, and we could have divided our memories in two.